I'm Kate Sheeran. I'm the Executive Director of the Kaufman Music Center in New York City, and this is Living the Classical Life.
Kate, thank you so much for being here on the show, and welcome.
Thank you. Welcome to Merkin Hall and Kaufman Music Center.
Thank you so much. So if I think of all the projects that you do and the diverse ways in which you transcend categories, we zoom out. Why are we even musicians in this world? Why are we doing this? You can think of the very lofty goals of the arts, but there are other pragmatic reasons to do what we're doing. I mean, what's the context? It sometimes feels like a bubble that we live in.
I kind of think of this in two categories. For myself, over a long period of time, and also specific to my role here at the center. For myself, over time, what I love the most about music is the really strong human connections that can be forged through music, whether it's performer to audience, whether it's to performers, whether it's teacher-student, all of those things. And it's a really unique way of getting to know each other, understanding someone else's perspective, all of that. When it comes to the center in particular, there's a quote that I think of often on a daily basis that really inspires me from Zipporah Yaxberger, who was the woman who founded the Hebrew Art School, which was the earliest form of Kaufman Music Center. And what she said is that she wanted to use music as a means to strengthen identity, which at that time, that was 1952, she built the Hebrew Art School soon after World War II, and she was really looking to uplift the Jewish community here in New York and strengthen their identity. She wanted people to come in and feel wonderful about their identity, feel like something resonated with them. And so I think about that now, and all the demographics that we serve and all the different people who come into the center, and I want them to feel strengthened. Something resonates with them, either they learn something or they hear something new, and it improves the quality of their life and makes them feel like they're having an even better experience here.
I'm wondering about the type of education that you experienced. I know that schools are changing a lot. You're creating change. I'm seeing change across the country, and perhaps it's going on elsewhere as well. But if I think about my conservatory education, I went to an amazing school, but it focused on the craft of music. And the rest was really left up to the trial and error and the imagination of the particular students. I wish I had had something, basic business sense, PR, marketing, how to run an arts nonprofit, technological concerns. How does this even enter into the picture, and why do we need to do these?
All the things outside of performance, you mean?
Indeed.
I think it's really driven by giving students tools that they can use so that their imagination is the only limiting factor. So if at Special Music School High School, our public high school, it's in partnership with the Department of Education here, we think about all the tools we can give students, and there are things from music technology, they take entrepreneurship, they play in all kinds of ensembles, they improvise, they play classical music, there's jazz, all these things. And the projects that they end up doing are really beyond what we would dream up for them, and that's the goal. We shouldn't be able to predict what students are going to be able to do with the education we give them. We should be hoping that they do things we haven't even thought of, but we've given you such a foundation in lots of different things that the sky's the limit. That's education at its best, I think, is that thinking about the next generation taking it forward, but helping to prepare for that to happen.
Well, that's something that I've always been so curious about, because both of my parents are educators, and we're always talking about what does it take in today's world to foster a dynamic, creative individual today. And is that something that you really can fully shape as an educator? And is that really a goal that you have? How do you even encourage them to use integrity and honesty and truth in a world that is moving away from that as their basis for forming their own identity and creativity? That's an extremely complicated question, but these are some of the things that I've been wondering about.
For me, a lot of that comes back to community and how you shape the community that students are in at any given moment, whether the community is their classroom, or it's their school, or it's the Upper West Side of Manhattan, or it's 5 boroughs of New York, and on and on and on as it expands. But being aware of those around you, engaging with different perspectives, having a tool that gives common ground. For us, that's music. We see students have beautiful examples of empathy and communication and kindness because they have those building blocks. And then we hope that they take it with them as their community and their world expands, whether they become musicians or whether they use what they've learned here to go on into another field.
Are there ideal traits that you encourage students to have in order to reach whatever this ideal is in terms of that kind of human being in this world? Is it curiosity? Is it what would an ideal student look like at the end of their time in formal education? Or is there such a thing?
The end of time in education is an interesting thing, right? Because we always keep learning. That's the real goal. I think among the goals is to always, as you said, curiosity. But part of that is continuing to be curious outside of when you're in high school or when you're in a degree program, or even if you're outside of an education setting at all. So I think curiosity is a big one. Empathy. And also all the things that we learn as musicians in terms of striving for excellence and not being deterred when things get challenging, and focusing on a goal. There's a sweet spot with those kind of 3 main elements of curiosity and empathy and excellence that end up kind of serving students really well. I don't know that I have it all figured out, but I hope that the students, I do hope for them that they just remain curious forever, because that will serve them the most. It's kind of when we feel not challenged or not inspired, that things start to get a little more challenging, I think, in life.
If I think of my freshman class as an undergrad, I think the people who graduated represented about 50% of that freshman class. And many of them, for various reasons, mental health, couldn't finish. What do you do about addressing wellness as a general subject?
It's interesting because these are the subjects that have kind of helped me decide to move from higher ed back to working with young people and people outside of degree programs. We have students here from 2.5 all the way through their 90s. So at each age, it's a different topic. And for some students, they will absolutely go on to professional careers. For some people, they're starting music later in life. For the youngest, they may or may not pursue music, for a long time. So thinking about this same subject at different ages is really interesting. But a lot of what I saw in higher ed were things that I thought needed to be addressed earlier in music education, in terms of the way we frame an education, the way we set standards for ourselves, the possibilities we present to students, the pressures we put on students. And so I really love thinking about that for younger students before they audition for conservatories, because many of those ways that students put an extreme amount of pressure and things on themselves exist before they even get to that freshman year class that you're referring to. For us, this kind of supportive community is really helpful, making sure that students have lots of outlets to talk. Obviously, in our public school, we have guidance counselors and channels like that for students. I've also heard parents say often, my child was struggling at their school, but once they came here and found their community, that things settled in a little bit more. So those students who end up going on to professional life have had this experience together of having musician colleagues supporting them. So once they get into that environment, it's not as jarring. And our students have been successful and are in conservatories now. So there are lots of ways to look at it, and I think just having the conversation is such progress. I think probably when we were in school, the conversation didn't exist as much.
It was really limited.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, we heard of the existence of
Right.
counselors, but that seemed very much out of the picture and just isolated events for perhaps the few people who
Right.
would experience that. But I remember reading stories in the news that a majority of, for example, classical musicians will
Yeah.
experience mental health issues
Yep.
within their lives. The New York Times earlier this year ran a piece that proposed that specifically pianists have the greatest incidence of mental health issues. So I'm wondering, is it your perception that these conversations are happening more?
Yeah, definitely. And in San Francisco, we implemented a professional development curriculum while I was there, with 4 categories, one of which was health and wellness. And I hope that becomes the standard for American conservatories, but certainly a lot of the conservatories are talking about it, if not doing something about it and implementing new initiatives. Sometimes people think that this generation is not so resilient. I don't think it's that they're not as resilient. I just think they're taking in so much more information than any generation before them. You have to have more tools to process it. You're seeing news from all around the world. You're getting information at every moment. You're constantly connected via devices. We need a different set of skills and tools for students to be able to cope with that and be able to filter and channel and focus energy because of that. So I hope it keeps evolving, but there's certainly good conversations going on in music about it now.
I'm so curious to learn just a little bit more about your work here at Kaufman Center, because I know that there's such a broad range of your offerings to the community, and as you said, across the entire age spectrum of people's lives. You've found a lot of success with that. I'm curious to know, okay, this is New York City. You could find funding here, and perhaps as with all the arts, this is a continual challenge, but let's say there's someone in a community in Middle America who wants to replicate this. Is that possible to form? Yeah,
that's one of the big questions we're asking right now is how do we get the word out about the model that's been built here over time? And some of that relates to individual programs here at Kaufman Music Center, and some of it is the whole. So we have 4 main parts. One is a community music school where 3,000 people study. And for young students, that's after school. For adults, it's any time. We have a partnership with the New York City Public School where we embed the music program, that's special music school. We have Merkin Concert Hall where we're sitting here right now where we present professional concerts. And then we have a new music program for teenagers called Face the Music. Now, sometimes when I say all of those things, people say, wow, that's a lot. But to me, it's really interesting to think about how do we optimize all these parts that have been added over time and have them work together. And one of the things that's most interesting to me about that is if we have all these education programs and we have this professional presenter, what are our values and how are they reflected in each area of the center? So who are the role models that we're putting on stage for our students? How does what we're learning from our students get reflected in our programming for professionals? There's all those questions. So that's kind of one large question that's fun to ask on a daily basis and that we're diving into. But there's also the question of partnerships that can create something that couldn't be there without both sides. And for us, that really pertains to special music school. It's Kaufman Music Center plus the Department of Education, and it's a mix of public and private funding. So we raise the money for the music program, we build and implement and run it. The Department of Education provides everything else for the school. That's a really interesting model that's produced great results for over 20 years now, and our youngest students consistently get in the top 10 for math and reading in New York State, which proves if you bolster music education instead of taking it out, all the effects that come along with it. At our high school, we've now graduated 3 classes, the high school's newer, Each of the classes has 100% graduation rates and 100% college acceptance rates. That's very rare in New York City public schools. There are only a few schools that can boast that. So again, we're proving the model of music education. I think that's one where, with the right foundation or nonprofit partner and public funding, there's a way to achieve something that couldn't be achieved with just the organization separately. That, I think, could be repeatable in smaller communities in other cities and here and around the world.
Well, of course, in the arts, always the question is mobilizing the funding.
Yep.
Let's say someone's watching this and they see the success and the diversity of the programs
Right.
you offer, and they said, that's great, but now I want to start this initiative. What would a conversation even look like with the potential funders of these? How are you selling this in a world that is sometimes skeptical towards the value of the arts?
I'm very lucky to have been here at the center for just over a year, and this is a school that was, special music school in particular was started in the 90s by my predecessor Lydia Contos and our board of trustees, and it feels like a miracle to me that this school got started and that it exists every day. But on a daily basis now, when I'm approaching funders, when we're talking to individuals about this model, we explain certain things, we give them certain facts and numbers, and of course, but the thing that really convinces everyone every single time is walking in the door. When you see the kids engaged in their classrooms, when you see the kids performing, both on the academic side and on the music side, you can't question it. It's palpable, you feel it. And so that is usually the thing that there's really no substitute for it. We just have to get people in the door. We have a new artist in residence program here at the center this year, and the idea is that these are artists who perform in series or have series at Merkin Hall, and then they're embedded in our education programs, multiple education programs. So they're really maximizing the sandbox that is Kaufman Music Center, and workshopping projects with students. Students are coming to see them perform, all kinds of things. One of those artists is Rob Capello, who's the host of What Makes It Great, who's phenomenal. And what he said to me last spring when he was preparing for his residency this fall is, Kate, I travel the country trying to engage students through music, and it seems like it's getting more difficult and more difficult. But here, everyone's engaged. Everyone is, ready to go. And so that's the thing that's really palpable for people both in music and outside of music that really helps us move forward.
So I know that you've encouraged the study of different instruments. So I'm thinking of one of my favorite musicians. He's not a classical musician at all, Sufjan Stevens.
Yeah.
I don't know if he had a classically based education, but I do know that he attended Interlock and studied many different instruments.
Right.
So let's say the 8-year-old Jolt walked through the door here at that time, if this program to that extent had existed, and I told you that I wanted to come here and study piano, what would you have told me, or maybe even opened my eyes up to?
If you wanted to study multiple things, or if you're just coming in and what would
Well, maybe at that point I wouldn't have known that other things were worth even considering, but at that age I certainly wanted to become a piano soloist.
Right.
I never would have thought that I was the host of a show. I never had that idea, and yet here I am.
I really think it's just about giving students access to lots of different experiences. And my particular version of that is, I'm a French horn player. When I got to college, I probably would have been happy to play Brahms symphonies and very little else for the rest of my life. I still love playing Brahms symphonies, but I also became friends with a lot of composers and ended up learning all about new music and realizing that was something I loved, like learning a piece with the composer in the room, and that led to exploration of other genres. But had I not had that experience, had someone not placed me in one of those ensembles at the first time, then I don't know what my life would be like now. Actually, I might not even be sitting here right now. For us, it's about kind of exposing kids to all different kinds of things and also listening to them about what their preferences are. But, for kids who are really young, I often explain this to their parents as, on a baseball team, everybody has to learn to play every position, right? You have to play first base, you have to play shortstop, you have to do that. we kind of have to think what's the musical equivalent. Well, sometimes in a large ensemble, that's like learning to play every seat in the section. But sometimes it's learning to play different genres, or if you were thrown into a group where you have to improvise, what's that like? Try it out now. Now is when you should try it out, not when you have to pay your rent based on whether or not you succeed in that situation. So it's really just about thinking about what can we give students now within reason, because if you overload them, that's not working out too. But this is a conversation we have all the time. And it's an interesting one for everyone, and you kind of engage the community in thinking about that and how the curriculum develops accordingly.
Were there ever instances of students, once again back to the example of the young, idealistic, ambitious 8-year-old me who was just starting out piano at that age, wanting to be a classical music soloist, were there instances here where such a person walked through the door and then they were exposed to, say, a jazz concert or new music concert, and then you hear them say, that's what I want to do?
Yeah, absolutely, all the time. And you know, when someone's 8, you're really just trying to give them the best education, the best fundamentals, the best teacher. And you really don't even have to think about, and what are they going to do with it? And that's great if you want to be a soloist. That means you feel really inspired right now, and we know that your thoughts are going to evolve over many years, and that's great. But every day there's some instance here where a spark is, you know, ignited based on something someone hears or sees. When you walk around the center, between different classrooms and different studios, there's the youngest kids and the oldest people all together. And so part of what makes this a magical place is that everybody's just inspiring each other all the time. And it certainly happens to us. You know, before I came down here, I walked past the first grade chorus room because it's fun. And I thought, and the teacher, Sean Hartley, is phenomenal. And it's thinking about, well, what is he teaching today? What inspired him to teach? Or, you know, you walk down the hallway and there's a piano teacher teaching, and okay, what is she teaching and why is she teaching that today? So it's not just for the kids, but it's also for our audiences who come in, and certainly for the staff. I mean, selfishly, I'll say it's fun to walk around, but that's part of what we all experience here all the time.
What I'm wondering is, with all the kids that you see here, how do they even, I'm not sure if they are articulated, but how do they even envision their musical lives? My generation was still growing up listening to the recordings of a generation where what is it to be a soloist? Soloists back then could exclusively play concerts and make recordings. That is an extremely rare instance these days, if you could call it the 0.1% of the 0.1% here. Even today, being a soloist, my sense is that musicians really are encompassing, for the most part, a really diverse set of activities.
What I see with our students, especially at the high school level, is they're asking these questions themselves, which I think is
that's amazing.
A beautiful thing. Actually, last year we had with an English teacher and a set of students at our high school, they started a project called The Unanswered Question. Of course, that's a nod to the Ives piece.
Yes.
But the idea is, we say that our education is for musicians in the 21st century. What does that mean? What are you as a student are a musician in the 21st century. What questions do you have? And the whole school submitted questions. We got questions from young people and faculty and high school kids. And some of the questions they explored were, how do I use music as a tool to give back to my community? How do I use art to talk about difficult subjects or subjects I feel compelled about? And one of them was issues surrounding refugees. And so what they did was make a wish list of faculty and professionals they wanted to talk to, and we brought them to the school, and the kids led the conversation. So I don't think we have the answers. I think that about what exactly it means to be a musician in the 21st century, but that's one of the best parts. Like, if we had one answer for that, then I think none of us would be doing our jobs. But artists are inherently people who question things, and I think if that exists in the younger generations, then we're in good shape, because they're going to make it even better from here on.
So that's the vision aspect. I'm thinking about the pressures that musicians face in today's world. I would think, my guess is that the earliest pressure that a child can face, perhaps, are the expectations and the vision of the parents.
That's right.
Who might come from that generation that expects their kid to be a star soloist.
That's right.
How do you address those parents and the pressure? And I have seen those
Yeah.
parents. They push really hard.
Right. We, as I mentioned, we have classes for really young folks, and in our public school, students audition, or they apply when they're 4 to begin when they're 5. And so obviously a large part of that for most students is parent choice. It's not that the young people have chosen it, although sometimes you get a 4-year-old who can't stop running to the piano, you know. And so that's part of the education we provide, and it's part of why music education is not just for one person, it's for a family. And we have really great faculty and directors of programs who have worked on this for a very long time to have these conversations. I think there are parallels with the things I'm talking about with high school students, or even at the collegiate level with parents at that point, which is opening their eyes to what it means to be a musician. What are all the pathways that students can choose with this education? Really, for special music school, we want everyone to be at a pre-professional level so that if they chose to audition for a conservatory, they would be well equipped. But we acknowledge that sometimes that education takes them on other paths. So we have, and that is also a beautiful thing. You end up in, we have students who've ended up in all kinds of career paths, and obviously musicians can take on all different kinds of career paths. But having that conversation with parents along the way is also helpful because it helps broaden their view about the importance of any one event. Don't worry, the first kindergarten recital is pretty amazing and they do amazing things, but if little Tommy has a slip up, it's not the end of the world. That kind of same philosophy translates throughout, that you're looking at the whole picture instead of any one instance or note or track for them.
You've seen the full range of musical pathways.
Yeah.
I'm putting myself in the shoes of many of my colleagues in conservatory. I look at the world today, the musical world today, and it's just, wow, that's a lot to sort through. I see the diverse programs that you offer, but I still have doubts about whether or not I can be a musician today and make it work. What do you say to those students who have those kinds of doubts? They want to do it, but they feel like this is a huge worry.
I mean, really anything in our world is a worry, so it's kind of calibrating that so that there's a few different things. One is making sure that they feel supported just as a human being, because I think sometimes we lose sight of that. We talk to students as pianists or violinists or trombonists, just instead of talking to them as a human being, and just kind of acknowledging that worry, and then talking about practical steps with what are you going to do tomorrow after graduation? What are you going to do in 2 months? What are you going to do in a year? And I think sometimes that helps students feel more comfortable about there being practical steps to success. But there's still a lot of unknowns, and there always will be. So it's this, the old adage of if you can imagine doing anything else, you should, but if you can't imagine doing anything else, music is for you. There's still some of that that's true, but sitting where we sit now, we know that also comes with beautiful experiences and success and all the things that we get to see when we're watching students, find their way. The other kind of really nuts and bolts practical advice I often give to students, especially at college, is something always leads to something, nothing leads to nothing. And I think sometimes as musicians we get paralyzed with waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect opportunity, that we don't take the opportunities that come up along the way. And that's not a total answer to the issue, but I think when you're open to that, new things emerge and you realize you have more skills and more options and more pathways than you think you might have had when you were in college.
One thing that I observe with my colleagues, and I'm curious to know if this is what you've been observing as an educator with all your programs, I see that many of my colleagues who might have the same ability with their musicianship, the ones who have the ability to connect with people verbally, have a distinct advantage. Are there ways to foster this skill, if you want to call it a skill, to try to help those people out there who would like to have that ability to connect, and
Right.
yet they're shy, or maybe they just don't have the verbal skills, or the language is not even their native tongue.
Right. We were talking about this recently about what are the skills necessary in an ensemble setting and what skills should we be looking for. You know, does an audition capture everything in an educational setting? What else should we be factoring in? And leadership is one, and communication is one, and certainly skill, you know, on your instrument is one. But humans, not everybody is going to be a public speaker and leader, and not everyone is going to be a great writer, and not everyone is going to be, you know, the most showy on their instrument. So it comes back to education of the individual and finding the strengths in each individual and having confidence in being able to optimize those. So, okay, if you're not if you think of it, I have lots of friends who play in successful chamber groups, right? If you think of a string quartet, someone might be the person who's writing a program note, someone might be the person who is always speaking at concerts, someone might be the grant writer, someone might be doing finances, but each person finds their role. I think sometimes when we overgeneralize what the education should be, we lose sight of the individual. And so my feeling about that comes back to helping an individual find their strengths. And that's true at all ages, you know, 2 to 85 for sure. But music is one of the tools we use to do that and help people feel more confident and find their voice.
Okay, so if we talk about being an educator as being a calling in this world, an underpaid calling, will you have considered that your life in arts leadership will have been, as a complete picture, fulfilling to the extent of realizing all of your dreams in this world?
Yeah, it's a big question. I feel so fortunate to be in the role that I have right now. And part of that is because I can put myself in the shoes of all the people that I interact with on a daily basis. I've been a performer, I've been a teacher, I've been a board member, all those types of things. And helping to shape an experience or forward motion for a community is a really fulfilling experience. It's really difficult, it's a bumpy road, but it's incredibly fulfilling. Really what my job is thinking about where we're going, where we can go, and then navigating all the bumps in the road that will come up. So it's a combination of leadership, but then managing what happens. And it turns into this puzzle of things that's incredibly fulfilling. So the short answer to your question would be yes. I would think for me, it's very fulfilling. I know people who wouldn't want to touch, you know, these types of roles with a 10-foot pole, and that's fine. But for me, this is a really big gift to be able to help craft beautiful experiences for other people.
Thank you so much for being on the show. It's
Thank
been a pleasure
Joel.
to talk about life and music and shaping the next generation, and I applaud you for everything you do to help and to contribute to this world.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Awesome. It was fun. Yes.